Let's welcome John Stealey on recording.
This program has brought back some fond memories. The presentations you just heard are a very small fragment of over 70 interviews that I conducted in the central West Virginia coalfields in 1967. And what I'd like to do is give you an overview of how it came about, some of the observations that I've made over the years. I wish to emphasize that these interviews are located at the West Virginia and Regional History Center at the West Virginia University Library, the WISE Downtown Library. And they're part of an immense collection. The West Virginia and Regional History Center possesses over 4 million manuscripts, thousands of photographs, and recordings like these. Tucker County was only one part of more than 70 interviews conducted in various coalfields in the north central part of the state. And they originated in a sort of accidental way. When I finished my comprehensives and my research for my dissertation in 1967, I was hunting a job, a position. And I spent a lot of time in the library, like a lot of history students. I don't know if they spend as much time now with computers or not, but unfortunately, that's something they miss. Being in the library is a good thing. And there was a dean of the libraries at the time by the name of Robert Ferguson Munn. He was single. He had a master's in history from the University of Chicago, and his PhD was from the University of Pittsburgh in library science. And he was interested in the West Virginia and Regional History Center, and he was also interested in the mining industry. And he had organized several bibliographies of material about mining history in West Virginia. And since he was single, I guess that had something to do with it. He was always in the library. He was roving the halls constantly. I would be there at 9:30 at night, and he would be there. And we used to talk many times about the research project that I had undertaken. But it was not mining. It was about the canola salt industry, where the mining of coal fed the salt furnaces, and slave labor was used. But that's another story. I won't get started on that. So I proposed to him one evening that the university had immense manuscript archives and publications about coal operators and governmental agencies that dealt with coal, but there was little testimony and no voices of the miners themselves. What was their view of history? What was their position in history? I knew that working people possessed good detailed knowledge of their work experiences, of their everyday life, just as you heard partially today. I proposed that the library back me in conducting an experimental oral history program or project involving retired miners that we might leverage into a grant-supported program. That would give me a job, you see. It didn't turn out that way, of course. But I will say that he responded with enthusiasm. And again, you can see some of the result today. First question that might arise today is, how did I locate the retired miners? Well, it was happenstance, serendipitous, if you might say so. I would travel to a village, and I would go to its general store, its pool hall, or places where people loitered. And I would ask them, do you know any retired miners? and I would tell them briefly what I was doing. I was trying to record history, oral history. Once I got access, and I'll speak about that in a minute, then the interviewees would often refer me to other people. And so once the web started, or the infiltration process started, might call it, I would be introduced to other people and I'd get other interviews. Now, the trick is, how did I approach people? Now, this is before digitization. This was with a recorder, real recorder. It was a Grundig recorder, and it was about half as big as this tabletop. I did not walk up to the house with that in my hand and say, I want to interview you and what you know about coal mining in Tucker County. So what I would do, I would approach the house and explain what I was doing. And I would tell them that they were recording for history, that their descendants, as some of them are here today, these recordings would be available to them someday. And I told them where they would be and what the significance of it was for history. We don't have the history of ordinary people who did the work. This is the hidden history. And most people responded favorably. I won't say all, but most did. And I would tell them who I was. And in West Virginia, as many of you know, people in West Virginia know each other. It's not a large state that way. You always know somebody who knows somebody. And that always helps. Politicians know it. Historians should know it. And this is how one gains access. Now, who turned me down? Well, I found management people generally did. They weren't free speaking. They weren't open often. They knew what happened. They knew what occurred around the mining community. And they didn't want to talk about it or speak about it. Then the next question arises, how did I come to Tucker County? Or why did I come to Tucker County? This is somewhat humorous and strange maybe, but I heard there were Austrian miners in Tucker County. Well, it sounded different to me. Now, I was used to various ethnic groups in West Virginia, but I hadn't heard about specifically Austrians. Because you've got to remember the 1950s were close to World War II and all that. So this sounded enticing, maybe the word, might be the best word. But what I found out when I got here was they weren't Austrians at all. They were Slovenians. They had come from a part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And they were called Austrians by people who, I guess, weren't students of Eastern European history. But what I found in Tucker County is what I found in many coal communities in West Virginia. I literally found a melting pot of many ethnicities. Diverse Appalachian whites, and they're more diverse than that's portrayed in the national press. Found many Sicilians, Lithuanians, and African Americans. As I always knew, the retired miners and their wives in Tucker County and elsewhere recalled their life's history and work experience in great detail, and you've witnessed some of it today. And I would say just a fraction of it, but it's very rich history. And what it remained for me to do is draw it out in the interview. Now, as I hear this, and I want to make the point that I hadn't heard any of this since 1967, but it did bring a lot of memories back. One of the men that was portrayed here was bedridden, I remember, in Pierce, West Virginia. There were 2 houses left in Pierce at that time. I don't know if there are any there today. I haven't been there. Might be some new ones, but at any rate. Now, do I have any regrets looking back? That might be a question. Historians always question themselves. We're funny people. Maybe I should say a thing or two about the history profession. The average PhD in history today, according to the American Historical Association, takes 8 years. When I was going through, it took about 7.5. And history is an old man and old woman's profession. We learn what we don't know when we go through the academic process. Maybe I can use Mr. Rod as a foil here. Lawyers know everything in 3 years. We historians learn what we don't know in 8. And so as I look back, I would say that I probably would have had better questions had I been a little older and more experienced when I did the interviews. But when I look back, they weren't bad. I guess it's self-congratulatory a little bit. But as I say again, that's my regret. Now, there were surprises. And I'm not going to talk 50 minutes or 75. People call me on the phone sometimes asking for advice. I have fellow historians that ask me about emancipation in West Virginia. It's very complicated. And I say, well, do you want the 50-minute lecture or the 75? I'm not going to do that today. But the surprises in Tucker County, well, one of them is the attitude toward the company store. I think the song by Tennessee Ernie Ford, 16 tons, I owe my life to the company store. That isn't the response of most of the miners I ran into in West Virginia. Most of them liked the company store as contrasted with the ordinary community store. They would always say the quality was better, the prices might be a little higher, but there's more selection, diversity of goods. So that kind of took me back. That contradicted everything I had assumed. The second thing I ran into in Tucker County, when I talked to some of the Slovenian groups or people, and I'd always noticed that they had younger wives often. And I would ask about that, and here's where diplomacy came in. But at any rate, what I found out, a lot of the Slovenian workers who came to Tucker County worked in the lumber industry originally. And I would ask them, well, why did you move to the coal industry? And you know the answer, it paid more. And that's why they did. And then often they would be in their 20s when they originally came, and as they acquired a grub stake, they often went back to the old country. This is something that struck me at the time, and if you follow the current TV programs with Henry Louis Gates with immigrant groups, you see that happens with many immigrant groups. But it struck me at the time. I didn't realize how extensive it was. And so what many of these men did, they would work in the mines of Tucker County and the lower Katanning coal and the Freeport coal. And once they acquired a grub stake, they would go back to the old country and acquire a wife. And that's the situation. The tendency, there's another tendency that I found in West Virginia. That was the tendency of, we'll just call them Appalachian whites. They could be of any ethnicity. They could be Germanic, they could be British or Irish, you name it. What I found is many of them kept a foot in agriculture as well as keeping a foot in mining. And when things were bad in mining, they would revert. And also, many of them would do it seasonably, by season. They would work in the mines part of the time. Things got bad or the season, they would go back to the farm and so on. And of course, this is a thing that, and of course, the other thing that's never been studied that I know of, and it may have been, is that the nature of the gardening in the mining community itself, they were extensive often, and we don't know much about that. And that's a cultural aspect that we often miss. But then I'll close that there was a depth of memory that emerged, great depth. And I'll give two, you've seen that today. I remember a 90-year-old African-American man in Scotts Run in Monongalia County that had come on transportation from Alabama. And we had the phrase used here today, on transportation. I want to clarify something. The company paid for the transportation for a reason, but I do want to make clear the miner had to pay for his transportation from his first wages. So they were deducted. It was a deductible expense, I guess you could say. This African-American man had come to McDowell County. And this is another thing that emerges, the extreme mobility of miners. This is something that I understand that many stay fixed, but also many are very mobile, and it gets back to the single men you were speaking about in various presentations, but it was not always single men. But he had come from on transportation from Alabama to McDowell County. Well, why did the company pay for him to come to McDowell County? Well, they were breaking a strike. The black miners didn't know it until they got there. They found out very quickly what was going on. And then he ended up in the Fairmont coal field, which would include Monongalia County. And I asked him, well, why did you go from McDowell County? McDowell County, you know, had a black newspaper, black physicians, extensive population of African Americans, many from all areas of the South. And I said, well, why did you come to the Fairmont coal field? And it was simple. Pay was better. And he made the move. And then I ran into a real jewel of a man, I'll say, on Roaring Creek. One of the men here was from Roaring Creek in Randolph County, Colton, Harding. Some of you know where those places are. Again, Lower Kittanning coal. His name is Pisa Ferrato. And I did the interview with him, and he was there when the first mine opened. And he remembered the serial number of the coal car and the date that the first load of coal went out of the Roaring Creek coal field. It floored me. And then the rest of the interview is very detailed, and I hope it's one where the tapes have been preserved well and have turned out well. But at any rate, the diversity is there. And I guess I'll conclude by saying this: in this climate of immigration, shall I call it that, and I don't want to get into too much detail on it, but it reinforces what I always knew about the demographic diversity of West Virginia and Appalachian. In this modern age, it might be well for us to remind ourselves that almost all of us are descendants of immigrants or are immigrants, just some older and some newer. Just that simple. I'll conclude with a West Virginia joke. It may be a joke to you. I hope it is. This is the idea. There was an outstanding book written about Appalachia called The Heart of Appalachia by John O'Brien. And he and a friend went from Pocahontas County on Route 219 to Elkins to drink beer. And they were drinking drank fairly heavily apparently, and ended up regaining their sobriety sitting at the base of the Henry Gasaway Davis statue at the edge of Davis and Elkins College, which many of you know. And his friend commented to him, you know, if a man jacklights a deer, he's going to lose his rifle, maybe be jailed, and at least pay a fine. He said, but you know, if you jacklight a state, you get a statue. So it's something to keep in mind. So I'll just stop with that. And,